Hit your son one more time, and I promise you, you will pay for it. Those were the words that came out of my mouth before I even knew what I was doing. I was Amara Johnson, a third-grade teacher at Lincoln Heights Elementary, and I was standing in a marble-floored penthouse lobby, staring up at a man the entire city feared. Kang Do-hyun. The name alone made grown businessmen go pale. He ran half the shipping ports on the eastern seaboard, and whispered rumors said he ran a lot more than shipping. But in that moment, I didn't care who he was. I only saw a 7-year-old boy named Min-jun flinching against the wall, holding his cheek, tears streaming silently down his face because he had learned, somewhere along the way, that crying loudly only made it worse. Do-hyun turned to look at me like I was an insect that had wandered into his home uninvited. His eyes were black ice. His voice was low and lethal. Get out of my house. I did not move. My knees were shaking. My heart was slamming against my ribs, but I did not move. Not until you understand that little boy is a person, not a punching bag for whatever bad day you're having. The silence that followed was the loudest silence I had ever heard in my life. 2 of his bodyguards stepped forward, hands ready, waiting for a signal from their boss. I genuinely believed, in that instant, that I might not walk out of that building. But I thought of Min-jun's face in class that morning, the way he flinched when I raised my hand to write on the whiteboard, the way he apologized for things that were not his fault, over and over, like a boy who had learned that safety was something you had to earn every single day. And I could not make myself care about my own safety more than his. Let me back up. 3 weeks earlier, my life was ordinary, predictable. I taught 20 to 8-year-olds how to read, how to add fractions, how to be kind to each other on the playground. I lived in a small apartment above a laundromat in a part of the city where the rent was cheap because the elevator never worked. My paycheck stretched exactly as far as it needed to, and not $1 further. I had grown up in foster care myself, bounced between 4 different homes before I turned 18, and somewhere in that chaos I decided I would spend my life making sure other children never felt as invisible as I once did. Min-jun Kang showed up in my classroom in October, transferring in mid-semester. He was small for his age, painfully polite, and he flinched at loud noises the way a dog flinches after being kicked one too many times. He didn't talk much. He didn't play at recess. He sat in the back corner of the room and drew the same picture over and over, a house with no windows. I tried everything a teacher is supposed to try. I gave him extra attention, small kindnesses, stickers on his papers, a seat near the window where the light was warm. Slowly, he started talking to me. Not about home. Never about home. But about dinosaurs, about a video game he liked, about a cat he used to have before they moved. And then one Tuesday morning, he came in with a bruise on his jaw that he tried to hide with his hood pulled up. I asked him what happened. He told me he fell. Children fall all the time. I know that. But I also know the particular way a child's eyes go flat and far away when they're lying to protect someone. I had that same look once, a long time ago, in a home I don't talk about. So I filed a report, like I was required to, like I was supposed to. Child Services came, made a visit, found nothing conclusive, and closed the case within a week. The system moved on. I could not. 2 days later, Min-jun came in with a mark on his cheek, shaped unmistakably like a hand. That was the day I stopped being a teacher who follows protocol and became a woman who does something reckless instead. I looked up the address on his enrollment file. I took the bus after school, transferred twice, and walked the last 6 blocks in the cold because I couldn't afford another fare. I stood outside a glass tower so tall it disappeared into the clouds, told the doorman I was there to see Mr. Kang about his son's education, and somehow, through sheer stubbornness, I got past the lobby. I found the penthouse door slightly open. I heard raised voices. A man's voice, sharp and furious, in Korean. A child's voice, small and terrified, apologizing in broken English and Korean both. And then I heard the unmistakable sound of a hand striking skin. I did not think. I pushed the door open and walked in. Which brings us back to that frozen moment in the lobby. Me standing between a Mafia boss and his own son, my voice shaking but my spine straight, refusing to leave. Do-hyun's jaw tightened. You have no idea what you just walked into. I know exactly what I walked into, I said. A grown man hitting a child half his size. I don't need to know anything else. This is a family matter. He's 7. He doesn't have a say in how this family handles things. I do. I'm his teacher, And I am not leaving this apartment without him seeing a doctor, and without you understanding that if I ever see another mark on that boy, I will burn every version of your reputation to the ground, connections or not. I want to be honest with you. I do not know where that courage came from. I had never spoken to anyone like that in my life. But something about watching that little boy try to disappear into the wallpaper broke something loose in me, some old, buried fury from my own childhood, and it came pouring out before I could stop it. For a long moment, Do-hyun said nothing. His bodyguards were still watching him, waiting for the order that would have ended very badly for me. But he raised one hand, barely, and they stepped back. "Leave us," he said to them, in English, so I would understand it applied to me too. "Not without him." I said, "Leave us. I am not going to touch him again tonight. You have my word, for whatever that's worth to you." I looked at Min-jun. He gave me the smallest nod, the kind of nod a child gives when they've learned to read a room better than any adult should have to. I stepped back, reluctantly, every instinct in my body screaming not to leave him there. But something in Do-hyun's face had shifted. Not softened exactly, but shifted, like a crack forming in something that had been solid for a very long time. "I will be checking on him tomorrow morning," I told him, "at school. And if he isn't there, I will come back, and I will bring people who care a great deal less about your reputation than I do." I left that penthouse shaking so hard, I had to sit down on the curb outside for 10 minutes before I trusted my legs to carry me to the bus stop. I fully expected to be fired. I fully expected men in dark suits to show up at my apartment. I fully expected 100 different disasters. What I did not expect was what actually happened. Min-jun came to school the next morning. He looked at me with something new in his eyes. Not fear. Something closer to disbelief, like he could not quite process the fact that an adult had stood up for him and nothing terrible had happened as a result. At the end of the day, a black car was waiting outside the school. Not to harm me. To bring me back to that same penthouse, at the request, the driver said carefully, of Mr. Kong himself. I almost didn't go. Every rational part of my brain told me not to. But I thought about Min-jun's house with no windows, drawn over and over on notebook paper, and I got in the car. Do-hyun was waiting in a study lined with books in 3 different languages, a glass of untouched whiskey on the desk in front of him. He looked different in daylight. Tired. Older than his years, though I would later learn he was only 38. The coldness was still there, but underneath it was something I recognized immediately, because I had worn that same expression myself for most of my childhood. Exhaustion. The bone-deep exhaustion of someone who has been carrying more than any one person should carry, for far too long, completely alone. "Sit," he said. It wasn't a request, but it also wasn't the same voice from the night before. I sat. "You could have gotten yourself killed last night," he said. "Do you understand who I am? I understand you're someone people are afraid of. I understand you run something dangerous. I don't particularly care. None of that gives you the right to put your hands on your son." His jaw worked, like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. His mother died 2 years ago. Cancer. Fast. Faster than anyone expected. I was not built for this. I do not know how to raise a child who is not afraid of me, because everyone is afraid of me, and I do not know how to be anything else. That's not an excuse. I did not say it was an excuse. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something other than ice in them. Grief. Old, unprocessed grief, calcified into anger because anger was easier to carry than sorrow. I am telling you the truth, because you are the first person in 2 years who has looked at me and not seen my name, or my money, or my reputation. You saw a man hurting his child, and you did something no one else in my life has had the courage to do. You told me no. I did not know what to say to that. So I said nothing, and let the silence sit there, heavy and honest, between us. I have people who manage his schedule, Do-hyun continued. Nannies, tutors, security. Everyone manages him. No one raises him. I did not realize how badly I had failed at this until I saw the fear on his face last night, and then I saw it reflected back at me in your eyes, and I understood, for the first time, exactly what I have become. Then change it, I said simply. Not for me. For him. Get help. Get patience. Get therapy if you need it. But you cannot keep ruling that boy's life the way you rule your business. He is not an asset to manage. He is a child who is grieving his mother and terrified of his father, and that is the loneliest place a 7-year-old can possibly be. Do-hyun was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked me something I did not expect. Where did you learn to speak with such conviction to a man like me? I grew up in foster care. I told him, surprising myself with the honesty. For different homes before I aged out. I know what it looks like when a child has learned to be small so the adults around them stay calm. I know what it costs a kid to survive a house like that. I promised myself a long time ago that if I ever saw it happening to someone else, I would not look away. Not even if it was dangerous. Especially if it was dangerous. Something passed over his face. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Two people who had both learned to survive rooms that should have protected them and did not. That conversation should have been the end of it. A crisis intervened in, a lesson delivered, a case closed. But Minjun asked, quietly, if I would come back. Just to see him. Just to make sure he was okay. And somehow, one visit turned into two. Turned into a standing arrangement where I would stop by twice a week after school to help him with his reading, though we both knew it had stopped being about reading a long time ago. It was on one of those visits that the Afro-Korean thread of my life first became relevant to Do-hyun's world in a way none of us could have predicted. I had lived in Seoul for 2 years during my early 20s, teaching English at a language academy while I finished my degree online. I had fallen in love with the country long before I ever imagined it would matter to my life again. I learned the language properly, not just tourist phrases but real, fluent Korean, the kind that takes years to earn. I learned the customs. The bowing, the honorifics, the particular weight of respect that Korean culture places on age and relationship and history. I did not use any of it in Do-hyun's home because I did not think it was my place. Until the night, everything nearly fell apart. I arrived for my usual visit to find the penthouse in chaos. Do-hyun's grandmother, Halmoni Kong, the matriarch of the entire family and the one woman even a mafia boss feared, had arrived unannounced from Seoul for an emergency family council. There was a business crisis, something about a rival family attempting to seize territory through a technicality in an old inheritance agreement, written in formal, archaic Korean legal language that Do-hyun's American-educated lawyers could not properly parse. Halmoni Kong was furious, convinced her grandson had let the family legacy slip through carelessness, and the entire household was one wrong word away from a war that would have cost Do-hyun everything he had built. I was standing quietly in the hallway with Minjun, trying to keep him calm as his grandmother's voice rose in the next room. When I heard the specific phrase she used, an old formal term buried in inheritance law that I recognized immediately from a research project I had done years ago in Seoul, purely out of academic curiosity. Without thinking, I stepped into that room, bowed properly at the correct depth for addressing an elder matriarch, and spoke in fluent, formal Korean, explaining exactly what the disputed clause actually meant and why the rival family's interpretation was legally void under a specific historical precedent I remembered from my studies. The room went completely silent. Halmoni Kong stared at me like I had grown a second head. Do-hyun stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time in his life. His lawyers, humiliated that a foreign schoolteacher had solved in 30 seconds what they had spent 3 days failing to untangle, said nothing at all. Where, Halmoni Kong asked slowly, in Korean, did a black American schoolteacher learn to speak like a scholar of our grandfather's generation? I lived in Seoul for 2 years, Halmoni. I answered, using the honorific correctly, bowing my head slightly. I fell in love with your language and your history. I did not think it would ever be useful for anything beyond teaching. I apologize if I have overstepped. She studied me for a long, long moment. Then, for the first time since she had arrived, she smiled. You have not overstepped, she said. You have saved this family a war. That night changed everything. Do-hyun's lawyers used my explanation to draft a response that closed the legal loophole within 48 hours, ending the threat before it could escalate into the kind of violence that families like his were, unfortunately, known for. But more than that, something shifted in Do-hyun himself. He began to see me not as a stubborn teacher who had barged into his home, but as someone who understood pieces of his world that even his own inner circle did not. Someone who bridged 2 worlds he had never imagined could touch, his grandmother's traditional Korea and the American life his son was growing up in, lonely and disconnected from both. He started finding reasons to be in the room during my visits. He started asking me questions about my life, my childhood, the 4 homes, the way I had built myself back up out of nothing. He started, slowly, achingly slowly, letting his guard down in ways I do not think anyone had seen from him in years. If you have been enjoying this story so far, make sure you're subscribed to AfroKorean Chroniclez, because the way this story unfolds from here, the danger that was still coming for all of us, the truth about what really happened to Minjun's mother, and the enemies circling this family from the shadows, is a ride you do not want to miss a single second of. The danger, as it turned out, was closer than any of us realized. Minjun's mother, I learned much later, had not simply died of illness the way everyone assumed. She had been the daughter of a rival shipping family, and her marriage to Do-hyun had been part of an uneasy peace treaty between two dangerous dynasties. When she died, that peace had died with her, and for 2 years, a woman named Elise Whitfield, Do-hyun's late wife's cousin and the ambitious heir apparent to the rival family's American operations, had been circling the Kong Empire like a shark scenting blood in the water. She wanted Do-hyun's territory. She wanted his shipping contracts. And she had decided the fastest way to get them was to marry into his life herself, using grief and convenience and calculated charm to slide into the role his late wife had left empty. Elise had been a fixture in the penthouse for months before I ever arrived, though I hadn't understood the full shape of what I was seeing at first. She was beautiful in a sharp, curated way, always dressed for magazine covers, always speaking to Minjun in a voice too sweet to be sincere. She called herself his family friend. Minjun called her, quietly, when no adults were listening, the reason he had learned to be afraid. It was Elise, I came to learn, who had struck him that first night, weeks before I ever set foot in that apartment, over something as small as a spilled glass of juice on an antique rug. Do-hyun had come home to find his son crying and Elise's story ready and waiting. A fall down the stairs, a clumsy accident, nothing more. He had believed her, because grief had made him distant, because guilt over his own long work hours had made him doubt his instincts, because a woman he trusted had looked him in the eye and lied without flinching. The night I walked in on him raising his hand to Minjun had been different. Elise had goaded him for 20 minutes beforehand, needling him about his failures as a father, about how soft and undisciplined his son had become, until his own exhaustion and grief and her manipulation combined into something he had never done before and swore, in that instant with me standing in his doorway, he would never do again. Elise did not take kindly to my presence in the household. At first she was dismissive, treating me like hired help who had wandered above her station. But as weeks passed, as Do-hyun's guard visibly lowered around me, as Minjun began laughing again, actually laughing, for the first time since his mother's death, Elise's dismissiveness curdled into something colder. She started showing up uninvited during my visits. She started making pointed comments about how strange it was for a schoolteacher to be spending so much personal time with a man of Do-hyun's stature. She started, I would later learn, making calls of her own, digging into my background, trying to find something, anything, she could use to remove me from the picture entirely. She found my foster care history. She found a minor incident from years ago, a false accusation from an angry parent early in my teaching career that had been fully investigated and cleared, but that still existed in old records if you knew where to dig. She built a narrative, a predatory, opportunistic teacher, using a vulnerable child to manipulate her way into a billionaire's fortune. And on the night of the Kong family's annual charity gala, the single most important social event on their calendar, attended by every major business rival, every society matriarch, every person whose respect Do-hyun had spent his entire life earning, Elise decided it was time to destroy me publicly, once and for all. I almost didn't go to that gala. I had no reason to be there, no dress that belonged in a room like that, no experience navigating a world of chandeliers and champagne towers and old money. But Minjun had begged me to come, clutching my hand with a desperation that told me how much my presence meant to him, and Do-hyun had looked at me with an expression I had started to recognize, quiet and searching, and asked me himself. Come as my guest, he had said. Please. I went. I wore the only formal dress I owned, a simple navy gown I had bought years ago for a cousin's wedding, and I walked into a ballroom full of diamonds and old money feeling every bit the outsider I was. Do-hyun met me at the entrance himself, in front of everyone, and offered his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. I felt eyes on us instantly. Whispers. Judgment. I held my head up anyway, because I had survived worse rooms than that one. Elise found us within the hour. She approached with a champagne glass in hand and a smile sharp enough to cut skin, and in front of at least 30 of the city's most powerful people, she began her performance. "I have to say," she said, loud enough for the surrounding circle to hear, "it's fascinating watching a schoolteacher play house with a family this important. Tell me, Amara, is it true you have a history of inappropriate relationships with the families of your students?" I did some digging. It's quite the story. The room went quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet when they smell scandal. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. I felt every old wound from my childhood, every foster home where I had been made to feel small and disposable, rising up in my chest. But I did not shrink. Not this time. "You did some digging," I repeated calmly. "Then you already know that accusation was investigated years ago and found to be completely false, filed by a parent who was later found to have fabricated the entire story during a custody dispute that had nothing to do with me. I'm curious why you'd bring up something you clearly know is fabricated in front of this many witnesses, unless you were hoping no one in this room would bother to check." A murmur went through the crowd. Elise's smile faltered, just slightly, just enough for me to see the panic underneath it. "I think the more interesting question," I continued, my voice steady now, gathering strength, "is why the woman standing in front of a grieving 7-year-old boy, presenting herself as a family friend, was the one who actually struck that child hard enough to leave a mark on his face the night before I ever set foot in that apartment. I wonder how many people in this room know that story." The color drained from Elise's face entirely. Do-hyun, standing beside me, went very still. "What did you say?" I hadn't planned to say it there, in that ballroom, in front of everyone. But Elise had drawn first blood, and I was done watching her terrorize a child from the shadows while wearing the mask of a family friend. "Ask Minjun," I said quietly. "Ask him gently, and ask him when he feels safe, and he will tell you the truth, because he has been carrying it alone for far too long, terrified no one would believe him over a grown woman his father trusted." The silence that followed was the kind that changes the entire trajectory of a room. Elise opened her mouth to deny it, to spin another lie the way she had spun the first one. But Do-hyun's grandmother, Halmoni Kong, who had been standing nearby the entire time, unnoticed, stepped forward with an expression carved from stone. "I have watched that child flinch every time you enter a room for 2 years," Halmoni Kong said, in slow, deliberate English, so every person present would understand exactly what she was saying. I told myself it was grief. I was wrong. I will not be wrong about this family again. Elise's carefully constructed world collapsed in real time, in front of the entire social circle she had spent years cultivating. Whispers turned to open stares. The business partners who had been courting her favor for future deals began quietly stepping back, putting distance between themselves and a woman suddenly radioactive with scandal. Do-hyun's face had gone through several transformations in the span of a minute: disbelief, horror, and finally, a fury so cold and absolute that even I, standing right beside him, felt a chill run down my spine. "Get out of my house," he said to Elise, echoing, almost exactly, the words I had said to him the very first night we met. "Get out of my family. And if you ever come near my son again, you will learn exactly why people in my world are afraid of my name." Security escorted her out within minutes, her reputation shattering audibly as 300 of the city's most influential people watched her exit through the same grand entrance she had walked through so many times before as an honored guest. By morning, every business deal she had been quietly assembling had collapsed. Every society invitation had been rescinded. The rival family she represented, embarrassed by the scandal attached to her name, quietly cut ties rather than risk further exposure. Elise Whitfield disappeared from that world entirely, exactly as publicly and completely as she had once tried to disappear me. But the story doesn't end with her downfall. It ends with what came after. Do-hyun sat with Min-jun that same night, long after the gala, and for the first time in 2 years, father and son had a real conversation. Min-jun told him everything: the juice on the rug, the slap, the threats Elise had whispered to keep him quiet, the loneliness of carrying a secret too heavy for a 7-year-old to hold. Do-hyun wept, I was told later, for the first time since his wife's funeral, holding his son and apologizing for every moment he had let his own grief blind him to what was happening in his own home. The following weeks brought changes none of us could have predicted. Do-hyun began seeing a therapist, quietly, privately, determined to become the father Min-jun deserved rather than the version of himself grief and business and generational pressure had shaped him into. He restructured his schedule, handed off responsibilities he had once refused to delegate, and started showing up to Min-jun's school events himself instead of sending assistants in his place. Halmoni Kong, who had once seen me as an unusual curiosity, began requesting my presence at family gatherings, insisting, with the kind of authority no one in that family dared refuse, that I be treated as an honored guest rather than an outsider. And Do-hyun himself began looking at me in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude or convenience. It happened slowly, the way real things tend to happen. A hand that lingered a moment too long when helping me with my coat. A silence between us that had stopped feeling awkward and started feeling like something neither of us wanted to break. A late evening, months after that gala, when he finally, carefully, asked if he could take me to dinner, not as Min-jun's teacher, not as a family friend, but as a woman he had fallen for somewhere between that first furious confrontation in his lobby and every quiet evening since. I said yes. What followed was not a fairy tale free of complications. Building trust with a man who had spent his entire adult life guarded against vulnerability took time, patience, and more honest conversations than either of us expected to have. There were moments of doubt, moments when the weight of his world, the danger, the enemies who never fully disappeared, the scrutiny that came with his name, threatened to overwhelm the fragile thing growing between us. But we chose each other, deliberately, again and again, through every difficult conversation, because what we had built was too real to abandon simply because it was hard. A year after that gala, Do-hyun stood in front of me in the same garden where Min-jun had once shown me the first genuine smile I had seen on his face and asked me to marry him. Not with diamonds the size of small planets or a performance for cameras, but with a quiet, trembling honesty that told me exactly how far this man had come from the cold stranger I had confronted in his lobby that terrifying, life-altering night. Halmoni Kong cried at our wedding, openly, unashamed, and told me afterward, in Korean, that I had brought her family back from the edge of something dark, something she had feared they would never recover from. Min-jun, no longer the flinching, silent little boy who drew houses with no windows, stood beside us during the ceremony, beaming, calling me by a title I will cherish for the rest of my life. Elise Whitfield, the last we heard, had relocated overseas, attempting quietly to rebuild a fraction of the reputation she had lost in a single humiliating evening. But the shipping world is small, and word travels fast, and no one who mattered was interested in giving her a second chance. As for Min-jun, he draws different pictures now. Houses full of windows. Sunlight pouring through every single one. If this story moved you, if you felt every ounce of that rubber band snap back into place, make sure you like this video, subscribe to AfroKorean Chroniclez, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story of love, justice, and the unbreakable bond between two cultures that were never supposed to meet, but found each other anyway. Drop a comment and tell me which moment hit you the hardest, and I will see you in the next story.